The original Crysis of 2007 was a success. It was years ahead of its time, bringing wide, open-ended levels and jaw-dropping graphics that still hold up today. But it was demanding, hugely so, to the point it even spawned its own meme. And that cut out millions of potential customers who simply didn't have the hardware to even get the game running. It was ahead of its time, sure, but PCs couldn't keep up. In 2011, Crysis 2 came out, in development for 4 years, a healthy amount of time. But I can only guess that the majority of that time was spent perfecting CryEngine 3. With an optimized engine, Crytek could reduce system requirements and improve graphics while maintaining the same open-ended structure of Crysis. But lower specs didn't just mean Crysis 2 could appeal to a larger amount of PC gamers. It also opened up an entirely new market: console, where the heavyweights are. COD, Battlefield, and Halo were still going strong, and that was where the money was. I don't think anyone has doubts that money was the motivator for the expansion to console. This is just how business works, but Crytek CEO Cevat Yerli didn't want anyone to think so. When asked why he decided to expand into console, he responded by saying that Crytek was known for creating a sandbox and the move to console was meant to expand that. What? Seems doubtful. I think the evasion might explain people's hostility towards Crytek's move into console. That and the fact that they were scared. Crysis was massive, with a notable level of complexity to its gameplay. On console, FPS were designed as a far more linear experience, and so Crytek thought that they'd not only have to get Crysis running on console, but they'd also have to appeal to console gamers. That meant linearization, a streamlining of mechanics. People were scared what that meant for Crysis, but Crytek were confident. Cevat Yerli was asked in an interview about possible dumbing down of Crysis. He said, "That's exactly what it's not. This is a tighter experience than ever before. Tightness and pulsating speed doesn't necessarily mean linearization or dumber. That's what people often say. If it's linear, it's more dumb. It's not. If it's more linear, it can be more dumb, but our point is not to be more linear. Our point is to be more fast-paced, more intense." So according to Yerli, the change from Crysis 1 and Warhead to Crysis 2 was linearization and not dumbing down in the name of a more intense experience. A noble design philosophy, and one that I really don't think would have garnered the hostility it did if it were true for all aspects of the game. Yerli implies that Crysis 2 wasn't sacrificing complexity with its linearization. Fans disagreed. I disagree for the most part. Some call Crysis 2 a bad game for it. I disagree entirely. Time to find out why. Crysis 2's secret weapon is not what you'd expect. It's not a hidden game mechanic or a design choice, it's a theme song. Somehow, Crytek managed to get Hans Zimmer to compose the game's main theme and then Lorne Balfe and some other guys to do the rest. That main theme carries the musical weight of the entire game. It's so indescribably unique and awesome that I have to insist you listen to it right now. For a single track and a few variations to make every epic moment 10 times cooler is mind-boggling. Crysis 2's theme is almost like the game translated into sound. You have the distinguishing screams of whatever instrument was used to make it to represent the disaster and chaos, and then the techie grandeur of the violins and the drums representing the NANOSUIT and military fighting against it. Even in the structure, you hear the screams first, a quiet section second, then the almost triumphant return of the violins and metallic clinks third, and then both together. It's simply a masterpiece, and as a single track, I think it's the best theme ever composed for a video game. There are stronger whole soundtracks, absolutely, even though the rest of the OST is still incredible, but on its own, it's one of Zimmer's Mona Lisas along with Mountains and No Time for Caution from Interstellar, Time from Inception and Molossus from the Dark Knight trilogy, to name the only ones that come to mind. Crysis has always been a game proud of its presentation. It's always had the best visuals and the best sound, but now it's got the best music to go along with the mind-blowing graphics and set pieces that still put everything else to shame now in 2015. You hit F to look in this game. That's it. It's got no other function, just a camera snap to something cool happening on screen. It should be a sign when a game donates one of its most important keys to look. If I had to pick out of all the explosions, rainy battles, skyscrapers and bridges collapsing, I think I'd pick the flooding as the best looking thing in the game. Just watching the towering walls of water smash and weave through the grid of the city as you scramble towards Hargreaves' helicopter, even though you know there's no way you'll make it in time. That alone proves that Crytek are just as good at making a well-shot scene as they are at making your computer work for it. I think 2 is without a doubt the best presented game in the series. Music, graphics and directing are all taken to a level video game developers should learn from as long as the industry remains. But hey, this is a video game, not a movie. Let's have a look at the gameplay. Crysis is tactical. You're only a super soldier when you're using up energy. You aren't mowing down hordes of enemies bouncing around like a rabbit with Tourette's as you would in Doom. You're cloaking round a corner, looking at the level, coming up with a plan and carefully executing that. And yeah, you're meant to feel like a badass while doing it. It's always going to be cool when you've planted a bomb behind enemy lines, rip off a turret, decloak, armor up and then surprise them from behind. You're always going to be more successful if you take the time to do this, because you might as well be made of marshmallows when you aren't managing your energy for maximum armor. That's Crysis, and the amount of ways in which you can execute your plan is the sandbox. Crysis 2 reduces the sandbox in order to make it easier to use, to appeal to console gamers. There's no maximum speed, no maximum armor, very limited ground vehicle use, no helicopter, no VTOL, no dual wielding, no prone. You generally take less damage too. Most of the changes are understandable given the setting, and that's more than likely why New York was chosen. But did it manage to stay true to itself? Crysis 2 certainly made its levels more linear, but it wasn't a total conversion. Levels are open and you can go where you please. The majority of buildings have interiors that you can use, and the city brings a small degree of verticality not seen before in Crysis. There are routes strung throughout the level to cater to all playstyles. There'll be buildings to climb through if you go left, there'll be a drainage pipe to crawl through if you go right, there'll be cars littered as cover and a bridge to jump on if you cut down the middle. There'll be hidden turret emplacements, C4, ammo, grenades and powerful weapons placed in these routes to encourage exploration. Enemies will usually be organized in such a way that taking one is often the best decision, as there'll be soldiers turned around to sneak attack at the ends and APCs you ought to take out first. Crysis 2 rarely leaves it up to the player to discover all these routes, because the NANOSUIT now tells you that you've got tactical options available, and when you open up your binoculars you'll get every tactical option displayed to you in yellow. Those will be things like stealth, ambush, assault, resupply, climb. You get the details in the level spelled out for you, and that might sound like a recipe for disaster, but I think Crytek avoided it masterfully. At no point will you have to use the visor. If you want, you can play the entire game ignoring NANOSUIT Ned and explore the levels with no guidance. If you prefer to get straight into business, you can use the tactical options, choose 1, 2 or all of them, tag them so they remain on your HUD and progress accordingly. It works in accordance with Crysis' nature, but it also works for the intensity Crysis 2 was supposed to bring. What we have in the end with level design is over 19 missions with at least one beautifully designed open-ended section in which you can tackle it in any way you see fit. It's a joy to go through them just for the choice, but then there's the graphics and sound design that keep your mind nailed into the world as you go through it. It's not got the same level of open-endedness as the first games, but the design is far tighter and every level caters to every playstyle. This is not dumbing down, this is what streamlining looks like. But level design is only half of what makes Crysis Crysis. The NANOSUIT is the one on the box art. In your moment-to-moment gameplay, the suit is a weapon. You can cloak, you can use maximum armor, you can power kick, you can jump supernaturally high and run supernaturally fast. But in all of that, you're never made to feel powerful. Maximum armor, while perfectly useful in gameplay, feels like nothing more than an increase in damage resistance. Running, while fast, isn't that fast. Power kicking feels weak. Stealth takedowns feel incredibly understated. Melee feels like it's got all the power of a firework strapped to a boxing glove. The only exceptions to this rule are the grab, which looks and feels amazing even if it's only worth doing on aliens, and cloak, which is always going to be awesome. Situationally, using armor to tank a grenade can feel great, and so can strapping C4 to an object and throwing it at an enemy. It's odd that NANOSUIT 2, an iteration which is, in lore, far superior to NANOSUIT 1, feels weaker than NANOSUIT 1. Surely the entry into the console market would have given a good excuse to go balls to the walls with a NANOSUIT, but the approach instead taken was to reductively streamline. You didn't have to remove parts of the NANOSUIT to make it easier to understand. Take maximum speed from Crysis 1 and Warhead for example. Instead of replacing it with a lackluster sprint and jump, tie it to a double tap of the sprint button. And to counteract it being used as a cheap getaway, grant a unique, super powerful melee attack when activated in maximum speed. Perhaps give a slow motion effect so it works in enclosed spaces too as an early upgrade. So there, we've just streamlined an entire aspect of the NANOSUIT specifically for the design of Crysis 2. Let's do it again. Maximum strength was removed in favour of a super cool but useless power kick, and a super cool but useless chargeable melee attack. Instead, we could tie maximum strength to holding the melee button. Let us use it to throw large objects like cars as a weapon, and have a far more powerful melee and grab. I'm not a genius game designer, but I'm certain streamlining the NANOSUIT from Crysis 1 didn't have to take away from it, and most importantly, didn't have to make it feel like NANOSUIT 0.5 rather than NANOSUIT 2. So, we've had successful level design but an unsuccessful NANOSUIT. Enemy design is what ties it all together though. No point in having abilities and well-designed maps if there's no reason to use them. It's pretty damn good. There are two enemy factions, Cell and Ceph, human and aliens. You'll fight both on numerous occasions across the story, but I believe there's far more Ceph than Cell. And that's good, because as aliens go in video games, these guys are pretty great. The general troopers take a fair beating, but they've all got weak points on their back. You can also insta-kill with grabs and stealth takedowns, but those aren't going to be abusable since they can zip around the map with ease. Commanders are much tougher variants. They take huge damage and dish it out too, with an impenetrable energy shield to top it off. Stealth is usually the best option, or baiting them around until their shield lowers. Then finally for the infantry units there's Devastators, big tank types with miniguns and thick armor. Stealth kills don't work. So we have two types that can be dealt with in stealth, and one that can't. Crysis uses this. Every combat arena will start with hordes of troopers mixed in with these commander type guys, and only at the back will the Devastators be found. It creates an organic progression in combat regardless of playstyle. You'll either be stealthing your way through the initial waves, then setting up a huge explosion to take out Big Dave as quickly as possible, or you'll be shooting your way through the grunts, baiting out commanders, and finally bombarding the heavies with as much ordnance as you can carry. The Ceph don't end there though. In the later half of the game, you'll be part of a war against the Ceph to get as many civilians out of the city as possible. The Ceph up the stakes too, throwing pingers at you. Interestingly named, but I like it. These are three-legged assault drones that make even Big Dave look like nothing. Massive guns, massive armor. You'll rarely need to take them on alone since you'll be fighting with Marines the majority of the time. The only reliable way to kill them is with explosives, to the weak point on their back preferably. That means cloak, because you'll A, need to get to the parts of the arena with rockets and C4, and B, need to get behind them undetected. The pingers have a defense against this though, with a sonic blast that drains your suit instantly, leaving you unprotected in the open if you don't keep moving. There'll always be enough explosives in the arena to kill it with though. I think the coolest thing about these guys are their entrances. I mean seriously, it's WWE quality stuff. They're always a fun fight that require good aim, exploration, use of a wide variety of weapons, and energy management. If there was ever going to be a boss fight type enemy, this was it. Cell on the other hand don't get as much variety as the Ceph do. There's normal troopers, rocket boys, and snipers, all of which can be dealt with via stealth or a surprising amount of bullets. Yeah, time to kill is quite high, but I think that's a good thing. The real reason 2's time to kill is higher is because you're in tighter areas, which means you're far more likely to land shots. But this works for the enemy too. You're much more likely to be hit by incoming fire, which is why the NANOSUIT is so much more resilient. It's a way of preserving the level of difficulty from Crysis 1. It gave me the impression that guns blazing was about as hard as stealth was, and I wasn't punishing myself by picking one over the other. I wouldn't compare the odd APC to Devastators or Pingers because it only really requires one good shot to take one out. They don't even move apart from in scripted events. Cell certainly isn't as varied as the Ceph are, but they do suit the few indoor sections of the game far better than the Ceph would. They also dominate the first few missions and only come back on occasion in the story. So they only serve as an introduction to the combat and a break from the Ceph. And in that, they work perfectly. It does regularly appear that some AI don't activate until you reach a certain area. Some AI don't even work. You can go right up to them and blow their heads off, but they won't react. Some AI won't acknowledge your presence even if you're in the process of sniping them. Sacrifices to get such incredible graphics on Xbox 360 and PS3, I imagine. I had this issue 4 times in my first playthrough, and while annoying, it didn't happen enough to leave a lasting effect. It doesn't seem reproducible either. You can go back into the same open levels and not have the same issues. Regardless, I can't find a single flaw in the enemy design of Crysis 2, apart from dodgy AI. It's no work of genius, but I can't think of anything that would have served the game's needs better. It's great, much like the instruments you use to kill them with. Guns can only be described as a total improvement, regardless of the type of player you are. Gunplay is as smooth as silk, but I don't need to tell you that. What sets Crysis a bar above the rest is the fluidity with which you can change them. You press X to bring up a menu, depending on your gun, and if you've found a weapon with the desired attachment before, you can change them to suit your situation. Silencer, scope, underbarrel are all changeable within 3 button presses, and with ease of use alone, the game had me changing my gun every other minute. It's a simple system, with a highly limited range of options, but it works and is balanced flawlessly. The silencer, for example, it lets you shoot without uncloaking for an energy cost. It lets you kill enemies silently, but it also reduces damage and ramps up drop-off. Or the laser sight makes the weapon far easier to handle at close range, but also stops you from fully aiming down sights. The variety of weapons is just as well done. It's a mix between the focused selection of Halo and the hulking lists of Battlefield, but with a totally new level of creativity. We've got the X-Mic for cooking aliens alive, and the K-Volt for stunning and dispatching enemies faster than assault rifles, but with a far more restrictive ammo reserve. There are advantages and disadvantages to each one, and you'll have to choose wisely depending on your situation. That's not to say those choices are hard to make. The game lays out an appropriate selection of weapons for you at the start of each combat arena, and that can feel a bit handholdy. But I'm happy with it overall, because the game is designed smartly enough you will get to see every weapon in an appropriate amount across the game, and have an appropriate opportunity to use it to its fullest. Snipers are placed in areas in which it is easy to snipe. If you find some C4 or a dual rocket launcher in a building, there's sure enough going to be something to blow up with them. X-Mics are placed in areas with a crap ton of aliens to cook. The pump-action shotgun is very common in the initial levels, especially the tight sections, and then the automatic shotgun, which is better in every way, is given to you later in the game when it's throwing all it's got at you. Balancing is even further helped by the 2-gun limit, meaning you're going to need to make sacrifices, and full restocks of ammo can work without making you a 10-gun wielding god. And then of course there's the gun resets. You can't hang on to the X-Mic or Jackal shotgun for the entire game because you're constantly met with situations in which Alcatraz gets smashed up and loses his guns. This means the designers don't have to account for every permutation of weapons you might have found from the start, and the end result is, as far as I can tell, damn near perfect balancing in combat encounters. Designers have to account for a lot when considering how many enemies to throw at you and how tough they should be. They need to think about what weapons the player has, and they need to account for the player's increasing skill. And usually that's it. But Crysis 2 wanted an upgrade system to go along with it. Whenever you kill aliens in this game, you'll be rewarded with nano catalysts. You spend those on suit upgrades, which makes sense since the suit is actually of alien design. There are 4 upgrade slots with 3 to choose from in each one. The first is the cheapest, the second slightly more expensive, and the third is by far the costliest. Keep that in mind. Tree 1 is all about tactical awareness. Bullet paths displayed is the first and cheapest upgrade of all 12, and you'll have enough for it after the first alien killed. It excels at helping you figure out where incoming fire is coming from and responding accordingly, which makes sense because early game you'll be discovered far more often in stealth. The next upgrade you'll only be able to buy after far more alien fights a little later into the game, Proximity Alarm, which fits in just as well. It gives you a handy layer of awareness which can save your life, works for both playstyles equally, and works best when you're a little better at stealth. So those first 2 options were designed perfectly, both are equally useful and the ascending costs make sense in the game. Then there's the third, Cloak Tracker, for 16,000 Catalyst. That'll take over half the game of saving to get, and for your patience, you get the ability to see Cloaked Ceph a little better, an enemy type you only get to fight in the final mission. Who, what, where, how did we get right there? Was there a misplaced 0 in that cost? Why is such a useless upgrade even in the game? Keep in mind that you can't read what an upgrade is before you have enough to buy it, so the tactical Cloak Boy cameos we see throughout the game doesn't indicate that we should start saving. I'd love to think that this was just a mistake, but in reality the other 3 upgrade trees don't fare much better. Tree 2 is all about armor. First upgrade greatly reduces maximum armor's power consumption. Very, very useful, and it's going to be used by everyone early game because it only costs a single alien. Second upgrade increases energy recharge speed. Again, very useful, but only really if you get caught out in the open. If you're playing well, you'll find a safe spot to recharge in, and this is only a time saver. Yet it costs 8,000 nanobucks. Then at 12,000 we get a double in effectiveness for maximum armor, a mode that's already made us practically invincible against the vast majority of enemies. It's not that it's not useful, it's quite good if you like going full Rambo, but it's never going to be as good as the first one. Having such a significant decrease in the drain of maximum armor means you can focus more of your attention on the enemy, which is going to be more of a performance increase than any buff ever could. Simply rearranging so nano recharges 100, meaning it would help early game when the player isn't quite accustomed to combat, and then putting double effectiveness at 8,000 and reduced drain at 12,000 would have fixed the entire system. Same story on upgrade tree 3. Reduce strain for sprint and jump at 600, then at 1600 you can control yourself more in the air? What? Then at 4000 you get a cool ground pound attack, but it isn't cool enough to sacrifice the drain reduction, not even slightly. The only tree that's done well is tree 4 for stealth. 1000 reduces footstep noise, meaning you can get far closer to enemies without being detected in cloak. Great for early game players. 2000 reveals enemy footsteps, better for players who are good enough to not have to worry about footstep noise. Then at 10,000 you get reduced cloak energy drain, which changes the way you play the game. Being able to walk comfortably with cloak gives you so much more time to set up complex attacks in enemy lines. It's a huge power boost, and by the time you get it, the game will be throwing all the enemies it has at you. It's well balanced and the cost is pretty much perfect. It would have been better if the first two choices were just as good, which would give the player more choices and justify the ascending costs. The way it is, the only correct choice once you have all three is reduced drain. Overall, the upgrades tried to give some illusion of progression outside of weapons, but in reality the reduced drains are the only valid options. I don't think this upgrade system belongs in the game. I think they're poorly balanced and only mildly entertaining at best. If Crysis really needed upgrades, they shouldn't have started with Crysis 2 when the system was clearly underdeveloped. They without a doubt should have been cut. At the end of the day, we've got a mixed bag. Guns are incredible, level design is great, but the NANOSUIT has regressed and the upgrade system was an unwelcome failure. I certainly feel that there's far more good than bad. The NANOSUIT is still a uniquely entertaining fun factory even if it isn't as good as its previous iterations. It's never been about making you a superhero in the gameplay, it's about giving you a wide range of badass tools to allow you to approach combat in many ways, and the energy bar keeps it grounded in the tactical genre. Crysis 2 succeeded in translating the formula into a more linearized environment and managed to raise the pace through simple density and the new tactical options. It even made the Predator-style combat of Crysis 1 and Warhead more intense with perfected gunplay, a larger variety of guns, and a larger variety of uses, which all of course ignores the better frame rates, graphics, and sound. It's not as good a tactical shooter, but for what it set out to do, I would call it a resounding success. You begin in a submarine being sent into New York City to extract Dr. Nathan Gould, who supposedly has important intel. Your name is Alcatraz and you're a Marine. You don't talk. Before you make it to the shore, a Ceph gunship blows up the sub, killing most of the Marines and mortally wounding you. You float ashore and the gunship prepares to execute you. Prophet, the leader of Raptor Team from the first game, come to the rescue, but you aren't the only one dying. Prophet has been infected with the same Manhattan virus that has turned New York to ruin. He kills himself and leaves the suit and its responsibilities to you. Gould calls you up, assuming you're still Prophet. He asks you to get to his lab. On the way, Cell, led by Commander Lockhart, hunt you down for crimes Prophet apparently committed until they shoot down a Ceph ship. You board it, killing the few Ceph still alive. Contact with their tissue causes reactions within the deep layers of the nanosuit, which Gould tells you after you finally meet with him. He also finds out that you aren't Prophet, but the suit plays a recording and you're out of the woods. Doesn't matter though, because cells show up and start shooting the place up. But that doesn't matter either, because the Ceph also show up a little bit later and disperse some kind of spore, crippling the suit and killing everyone else. You're screwed. But then, Jack Hargreave, the man who spent over half a century developing the nanosuit from Ceph technology, reboots the suit and you're back in action. He guides you all the way to another spore disperser to find out what the suit would do in contact with it. You learn that the Manhattan virus is a Ceph battle tactic which melts down the dead into easily disposable biomass. And unfortunately, interaction with the spores doesn't work. You don't have much time to escape as the US military decide to flood part of Manhattan in hopes of shutting out the Ceph. Hargreave sends a helicopter, but you aren't fast enough. Washed away, you're discovered sometime later by none other than Chino, a survivor of the submarine attack. The entire military force is now focused on the evacuation of non-infected civilians, and after a failed attempt at trying to stabilize the nanosuit's processes, Hargreave advises you to help them out. You head a 4-mission-long war against the aliens with Colonel Barclay and Gould, buying just enough time to get the trains moving, but also buying Hargreave enough time to come up with a way to use the Manhattan virus against the Ceph, as he shows you when your attempt to protect evacing Marines against a brutal Ceph attack almost kills you. You climb into the Ceph spire and a white spore is expelled rather than the black from before, killing almost every Ceph in the area. Almost. A Ceph pinger survives and comes inches from killing you. You're saved by Barclay and Co, and Gould convinces them to drop you off at Roosevelt Island where Hargreave is based so you can get him out safely. Cell is waiting for you, but with Hargreave's help you disarm their trap and dash Lockhart out of a window. On your way into his facility, he betrays you and tries to bust you out of the suit by any means necessary. But that doesn't work. Tara Strickland, a woman who you've seen previously arguing with Lockhart, helps you. Apparently she's CIA or something. She still wants to rescue Hargreave, so up you go. You confront Hargreave, but it turns out he's stuck inside some lemon and lime flavoured jelly and his mind's in a computer. And he's slightly mental, and he's going to give you a big scary syringe which you will inject without question, and the Ceph are coming to kill you, which will kill him, but he's going to blow up the facility anyway, so much for that. You wash up and meet Strickland and Gould, who are with a convoy planning to get you and the suit to the centre of the island. You don't have that much time though, because Stratcom has decided to use a tactical nuke and kill all the aliens with it. Yep, the Avengers stole Crysis 2's plot. The Ceph aren't having that, they've decided to get rid of the island themselves, with Central Park going up first. You fly up to the raised park, dash your suit into the spore dispersal thing with seconds to spare, and then the white light comes and saves the day, killing all the aliens. Much like my life. But then the nanosuit starts talking like a person rather than a computer. It's done this occasionally in the game before. It turns out Prophet isn't dead. His consciousness is stored within the suit. Prophet's found out that the Ceph aren't just in the Lingshan Islands in New York. They're everywhere, and they've been there since the beginning. Sequel bait engaged. What Prophet doesn't tell you is that his consciousness is going to replace Alcatraz, and he's basically now stolen your body. Okay. And that's the end of the game. Crysis 2 wanted to tell a grounded story. Grounded doesn't have to mean realistic, it just means realistic relative to that universe's reality. Just because there's aliens or dragons or zombies in your story doesn't mean it can't be grounded. Crysis 2 also doesn't follow a classical story structure, although it is well paced. There's no big display of alien power in the middle that the protagonist has to work to stop. There's certainly more than 3 acts. It does that to be grounded. It also has entire plot points fail and amount to nothing as they would do in real life to be grounded. It's that, with the graphics and the sound, that gives Crysis 2 its grounded atmosphere. And it's a very big problem when the game's writing decides to go full 180 and abandon all of that for no reason whatsoever. Of all the parts in my summary, Hargreave's betrayal sounded the most ridiculous. Kind of odd that after Hargreave literally orders his men to shoot you in the head, you just take his syringe without question or hesitation. What? The entire Hargreave betrayal added literally nothing to the plot and was utterly ridiculous from the start to the end. Why does Hargreave not just ask you to let him wear the suit? Even if it would result in Alcatraz's death, he would have accepted. Why doesn't Hargreave knock you out before the procedure? Syringes can clearly get in the suit. Why was the Hargreaves actually a brain in a jar thing necessary? If they wanted a plot twist, this was the most ridiculous way of doing it. Why does Hargreave suddenly go mental despite him displaying perfect calmness in every other situation beforehand? If it was the lack of chemicals resulting in his calmness, why doesn't that help him not go insane? Why is Hargreave suddenly lost because the Ceph showed up? He doesn't have defenses? He doesn't have another plan? If consciousnesses can be stored in nanosuits, why the hell couldn't Hargreave have gotten into the suit that way? He built the thing, he's been studying them for decades, there's no way he wouldn't have already known. If there was already a huge Ceph presence in New York before the invasion and that's why Hargreave's based there, couldn't he have simply moved his body somewhere else? Like in a lead bunker halfway across the world? If he genuinely wants to save humanity, why wouldn't he, the man whose knowledge is the human race's best chance, take some bloody precautions against getting discovered and killed? All these questions raised by a betrayal which adds next to nothing to the story. We do get some good dialogue between Prophet and Hargreave in a flashback as he tries to justify setting Raptor team up in Crysis 1. Death is an inconvenience, we are all dead men walking. It's a good justification and man, the voice actors knocked it out of the park. Hargreave, even though he lied and got characters we knew and loved killed, made the right choice for humanity. He needed to get the suits interacting with the Ceph. It's really important closure on Crysis 1, but that just adds insult to injury. We're told how much Hargreave is willing to do for humanity, but now he's willing to throw it all away? He doesn't even try? How could the writers not have seen how contradictory this scene was and how much easier it would have been to just not have a twist here and get him out? It ruins Hargreave's character and absolutely should have been cut. By far the worst sin this mission commits though is doing everything it can to strip away the grounded atmosphere that sets Crysis apart from the competition. We've got a game which tried to sell the player some hard-hitting death scenes a mission beforehand, but is now going to give us a reveal that with an appropriate backing track could belong in a kids' movies from the 90s. What's the point in spending years perfecting graphics and sound if you aren't going to take the same level of care in building the plot that threads all of these jaw-dropping arenas together? If you couldn't tell, this mission upset me. I came off the night I played it with a bad taste in my mouth, because this game was so close to not having a single weak mission. There are 19 in total, and this is the only one that sucked. That's why it burned so bad. But I think that can be taken as a twisted compliment. 18 out of 19 is still a pretty stellar score. Now those missions weren't marvels of writings in video games, but they served their purpose effectively. They were the threads that connected and gave context to the levels we ended up playing in the game. They showed us every angle of the New York disaster, from civilian casualty in the alien incursion to the nanosuit's mystery and desperate military evacuations. They failed to make us care, but by God did they succeed at keeping us entertained. Some characters succeeded. Hargreave was a good guide and he builds his bond with the player when he tries to save us on numerous occasions. I think that was part of the reason his dumbass betrayal irritated me so much. Commander Barclay was just as good as Hargreave and stayed that way throughout. Even Gould got good in the end despite his voice acting. Others failed. Gould at the beginning is just ridiculous.
Prophet, they've set up roadblocks in the tunnel. You gotta break through, man!
Seriously, it does its work in counteracting the serious tone every other aspect of the game is trying to sell. You at one point on your initial journey to Gould need to break into his lab and trash his computer because he forgot to delete the address of his ex-girlfriend's apartment. I mean, it's a really cool mission and not at all worth mentioning in the wake of Hargreave's betrayal. But still, then there's Lockhart, whose argument with Strickland is one of the most poorly voice acted scenes I've ever heard in my life.
Get!
He isn't gonna like this, and last time I checked, we both
That's
worked
where you're
for him.
wrong, Miss Strickland! You work for him! I answer to the Cell Executive Board and the DOD! I don't give a shit what some senile old shareholder like Hargreave may or may not like!
That's majority shareholder and former president of the Crynet board. You want to be careful what enemies you make here, Lockhart.
This conversation is over!
It sounds like the stuff you'd hear in a comedy, not a video game that prides itself on being the best presented experience on the market. Lockhart was one of the worst developed, written and voice acted villains I've ever come across in a video game. Not a very big deal considering he's not at all portrayed as the main villain and he's only even in 3 missions. Strickland was just irritating throughout and could have been cut without consequence. But even after those failures, we're weighted well into the positive side. Good characters get far more screen time than bad ones. We still haven't talked about the villains though. I once heard that a story is only as good as its villain or villains. My initial reaction to that was bollocks. We've all seen a movie, read a book or played a game with a good story in which the villain wasn't particularly compelling. Crysis 2 for example. The Ceph are just aliens. I mean, that's it. Their motivation's pretty cool, but you only get to read about them in the books. Other than that, they're just aliens that you shoot. Not very original. But now I agree with that statement. What purpose does a villain serve for a plot? If If I were the main character of a book and in my opening chapter, Todd Howard comes up to me with a knife and says in 264 days, I'm gonna stab you up. Todd is now the main villain, and with that I can do a huge amount of things with my story. How am I gonna stop myself getting killed? Why am I being targeted? Who am I gonna ask for help? Who is Todd working with? How is Todd tracking me? Why 264 days? Will I take the threat seriously? All of these questions I can spend a book answering, and there we go. I have a plot. Todd's not the most interesting of guys, but I have a plot, and with a good bit of writing I could make it a bestseller. Now we'll have a look at the Ceph. They're taking over Manhattan. Wow, original. But I'm not being sarcastic, the game makes it original unlike so many other stories who have attempted the same. Why are the Ceph targeting us? The game makes a mystery out of it and gives us answers. How are the Ceph invading us? The game makes a mystery out of it and gives us answers. What are their strategies? Why are they melting down the dead? How are we going to stop them? Crysis 2 asks and answers all of these questions very well, but also gives them a real sense of mystery, which is something rarely seen in video games and is never done better than in Crysis 2. Well, if we restrict that to FPS games. A villain in any form is the primary motivator for the events of every story ever written. Really, all it has to be is an opposing force to that of the protagonist, and all it has to do is ask questions. The plot answers them. The Ceph aren't particularly memorable, but Crysis 2 is because of them. Every time Crysis 2 tries to build some character, it falls flat on its face. It presents tragedy and death but gives us no reason to care. When Hargreave laments about his dead soldiers, I felt nothing because I didn't know who they were. When Martinez dies with the trigger in hand, I felt nothing because I barely knew who he was. At least they bothered to name him. All the civilians infected with the Manhattan virus, don't know who they are. The nuclear strike threatening to wipe out everyone you've met from the start, I only knew through people, let alone cared for them. Hargreave died the mission before. There's a scene when you're escaping a collapsing tower after a civilian evac. You only have seconds before you're buried, but a couple you saw earlier in the level trying to reach each other need help. The woman's leg gets stuck and they run out of time. It was a truly upsetting scene. At least it was until I realized that Alcatraz, the man with the super-powered NANOSUIT, just sat in the gunner's seat humming a song while they desperately tried to break free. Why didn't Crytek take this opportunity to give Alcatraz, a silent protagonist, some character development? Why didn't he save them, or at least try? It would have made for an infinitely more satisfying scene, with lives saved, the NANOSUIT made to look awesome, and Alcatraz given some personality. It's a well-known writing concept for character building that the reader needs to see the protagonist do some kind of good deed for he or she to care. Like saving a cat out of a tree, the classic example from Superman. We see no such thing from Alcatraz, yet this game is ripe with opportunity for it. Why couldn't we have saved Hargreave's men? Why couldn't we have saved Martinez? Why couldn't we have saved Hargreave himself? Why in God's name couldn't we have at least tried to save that couple? If a character is going to live through a tough situation, make sure the protagonist or a pre-established character saves them, or they work their own way out, building their character. If a character is going to die, make sure he or she is at least somewhat developed, like that couple, otherwise there's no point in wasting the reader or player's time on it. The game misses both marks every single time, but perhaps Alcatraz isn't the problem. There's a reason Alcatraz is voiceless. Prophet has said that a soldier is as good as the amount he is willing to sacrifice. Though that said in the next game, it's in this one that the idea is set up. Through Hargreave orchestrating Raptor Team's death, Hargreave's own sacrifice, and of course Prophet's suicide. So when Prophet comes back at the end, imprinting his consciousness into Alcatraz's body, Alcatraz makes the ultimate sacrifice. People initially reacted poorly to this, saying that Prophet basically killed Alcatraz and took center stage after he did all the work. But really, this ending was the best closure he could have gotten. He sacrificed everything he had to save humanity. He sacrificed his own humanity, and that's what defined Alcatraz. He was one of us, a human doing what a human does in the face of destruction. Fight back. That's why Alcatraz is silent. You're meant to imprint your humanity, your personality onto him. I wondered why I still didn't want him to die at the end after all I said about his development. He still should have gotten those moments to save people, but not so we can learn about him, so we could have projected ourselves through him, which is what we wanted to do since we inhabited him. Imagine Prophet or Nomad in the gunner's seat. Pre-established characters whose personalities we already knew. If they were watching that building collapse and didn't move, it might have been questionable, but I don't think I would have even noticed. You inhabit Alcatraz in Crysis 2. It's why he has no voice, it's why we don't know what he looks like, why he goes by his military code name. That's why I felt invested in Hargreave and Barclay's characters. They're not even with you for that much of the game, but they help you, they save you. Not just Alcatraz, you. That's why the moment that Alcatraz turns his head to look at the couple before he enters a decontamination chamber was so powerful for seemingly no reason, and why I wanted to reach through the screen and save them myself at the end. It's a problem that the game doesn't let us do that, but regardless, Alcatraz is used as the player's vessel to help with immersion, to sell the game's themes on sacrifice and humanity, and to make the player care far more about secondary characters. Probably one of the best uses of the silent protagonist I've ever seen, and it's sad that it could have been so much better. But there's another part of Alcatraz's character aside from his personality which receives similar treatment, the NANOSUIT. It takes a role in the plot far more integral than in previous games, with its secrets being the key to stopping the invasion. But the NANOSUIT makes its wearer a superhero. Crysis 2 is not a superhero game or a superhero story, but it's undeniable that Alcatraz is one. That's reinforced no better than in the opening cutscene, with the suit being built up as the ultimate badass. Yet this is not carried over into the game effectively. The writing fails the NANOSUIT as much as the gameplay does. The vast majority of the story is all about getting the suit to various places because it contains all the answers. It's hyped up and constantly aggrandized as a marvel of human ingenuity. I actually think the mystery built up around the suit was really well done and culminated in a bittersweet but satisfying reveal. But mystery is a different beast from awe. You can't just tell us that the suit is pretty cool if we rarely get to see that in practice. Imagine if in Iron Man, instead of giving us the greatest walkout in movie history, he just walked up to the tank, touched it, and disabled it. Then the movie tried to act like the Iron Man suit was incredible because it killed a tank with sheer advancedness. In Crysis 2, the only time we see Alcatraz doing something cool is when he kills Lockhart by dashing him out of a window. All the way through, you'll be hearing Strickland and Hargreave begging people not to damage the suit. He even explicitly asks you not to break his billion-dollar suit at one point. And what about the multiple times that Alcatraz is lying half dead on the floor and only comes out alive due to luck or someone saving him? The time with the pinger reactivating in front of the evacuating Marines, for example. Do we get up and save them? No, we crawl helplessly and hang on to the VTOL for dear life. What does this game want the player to think they're wearing? A mysterious supersuit made out of highly advanced nanomachines, or a piece of glass stuck together with chewing gum and a glue stick? There's nothing wrong with Crysis, a highly tactical shooter going for a more grounded approach, but then why sell us a game with the trailer being about it running up to a tank and taking it down like it was nothing? I don't think that was the game's intention. It wants to make you feel powerful, but it just didn't hit the mark. It's not gameplay or mission design. It's some bad writing here and there, poor choice of animations, and a difficult transition into the console market that ultimately creates the tonal conflict that brings the NANOSUIT down in Crysis 2. What we've got at the end is a complex story with twists, mystery, and intrigue effectively paced throughout levels that echo the plot on a surface level to such a degree that it hasn't been matched in 6 years. It trips on its own laces more than once, fails to build character, and has story structure that serves its grounded themes far more than the plot itself, but it is a highly enjoyable and effective storyline. Crysis 2 was the first in the series to come with a multiplayer in the base game. It followed the single player in having a much more console-y design with small tight maps, progression systems, and kill streaks. I thought that having every player being a super soldier would lead to problems, but since armor and cloak are so fluid in this game and everyone is bound to their energy pool, you get pretty much perfect balancing. No one camps with cloak because your energy would run out and the opponent could just armor up, turn around and kill you while the camper has no energy. No one jumps around like madmen because it drains energy, leaving them vulnerable. No one just stays in maximum armor all the time because you'd end up with less available energy than someone managing their energy well. Use of the NANOSUIT in multiplayer works perfectly. It's truly a tactical shooter, and the best decision they made was to make sure that every player has the same set of core abilities all the time. I have heard many more great things about Crysis 2's multiplayer. good map design that accounts for power jumps, a rewarding progression system, but I can't say for sure because not once have I ever played it. The PC version of Crysis 2's game servers were hosted by GameSpy, and when they went under, so did Crysis 2's multiplayer. According to a Crytek employee, as of May 31st this year, the multiplayer modes in Crysis and Crysis 2 for PC will no longer be playable. The conclusion of online multiplayer support comes as a result of GameSpy technology shutting down all of their hosting services. GameSpy has been providing multiplayer functionality for Crysis and Crysis 2 since they launched. The single-player campaigns in both games are unaffected by this transition, and the multiplayer mode in Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions of the game will remain playable. This is just the reality of business, but it cut a large part of Crysis 2 out to never be restored. I don't know who to blame, but companies go bust all the time. I can only point the finger at EA. Using GameSpy instead of providing servers for a game whose largest audience was PC? That was not a wise decision. Battlefield 1942, 2 and 2142 went down with Crysis. But when PC gamers are passionate about something, they find a way around it. Crysis 1, 1942, 2 and 2142 are now playable thanks to the help of networkers and modders, but no attempt to restore Crysis 2 was successful. I can't give a conclusion on anything about the multiplayer, I could only say what I did based on YouTube gameplay. It's gone on PC and dead on consoles, and that's the sad, blunt truth. The reason people were scared of Crysis 2 is simple. Crysis is a tactical shooter. Attempting to make that into an intense, fast-paced experience seems contradictory. But in reality, Crysis 2 is still Crysis. It's still a tactical shooter, and it's also an intense, fast-paced game. It could be both, and it is. That wasn't achieved without failures, but those don't come close to bringing the game down. Its story, while oddly structured and clearly flawed in certain parts, held up the alien mystery sci-fi plot we got from the first game, and is thoroughly entertaining throughout. Crysis 2 is a good game. It's a great game. It's a masterpiece of presentation and gun handling. It's still got the gameplay that managed to make a tactical shooter truly badass, and it is absolutely worth playing along with its predecessors. But Crysis didn't end at 2. The linearized Crysis got its own sequel in Crysis 3, a conclusion to the story and a change up in the gameplay. Let's find out how well Crysis 3 concluded the series next time. For those wondering where the videos on 1 and Warhead are, they're planned, but my Origin versions don't work due to some kind of incompatibility with FX CPUs, so I can't put a date on them. But I really want the video on Crysis 1 to come out November this year, exactly 10 years after its original release. In the meantime, I'll have extra notes in the description that didn't make it into the final cut. Subscribing, liking, sharing, and commenting with feedback is what gives me the motivation to keep doing these videos, and I can't thank everyone who does enough.